Hello, this is Mario from Audion. In this video, we will explain visual assets. In Audion, visual assets are 2D and 3D objects that you can place in the 3D render to enhance and contextualize the visuals of your model, such as people or wall decorations. You can add visual assets anywhere in the model for decoration. You can also assign visual assets to sources and receivers, so that they are represented with the chosen asset rather than the default red or blue sphere. Visual assets do not have any acoustical effect. Rather, they are only added for visual purposes. If you combine visual assets with the ability to freely change layer colors, you can make a 3D render look much closer to the real room. Changing layer colors is explained in our video on the 3D view and 3D render. Aside from the 3D render itself, visual assets will also appear in specific tools that obtain visuals from the 3D render, such as the Soundscape app and Movie Realization. Audion already comes with a selection of copyright-free assets that you can use. However, you can also import your own 2D images or 3D objects to use as assets in Audion. To add an asset to a model, one must go to the 3D render, specifically the standalone 3D render accessible from the top icon bar. Assets cannot be added in the 3D render found in the material list. First, let's add a decorative asset that's independent from a source or receiver. You will see some blue text at the bottom left corner of the window, so we can add a new asset with Ctrl left click. The asset will be created directly where the mouse is pointing. So if you want to add an asset of a person or carpet, you should Ctrl click on a point on the floor. Or if you want to add an asset of a wall art or blackboard, you should Ctrl click on a point on the wall. Here, I will add a carpet on the floor, so I will Ctrl click on a position on the floor. And I will select to create a 2D asset. I will select an asset from Audion's default asset library. You can change the position with numbers, incremental buttons, and sliders, just how it is done for point sources and receivers. However, you can also reposition the asset by Ctrl-clicking in the 3D render. If there are step levels or textures on a wall, you might need to manually adjust the position. Here, a good way could be to use the incremental buttons. Also remember, you can toggle X-ray with the X key. If the face camera checkbox is unticked, the asset will automatically align to the surface it is placed on. So typically, you will not need to manually set the orientation. However, you can adjust it here if you need to. The face camera option will be useful later, but I will skip it for now. Here, you can adjust the size of the asset. When the Dimension is Vertical checkbox is unticked, Audion will scale the asset by setting the horizontal dimension of the image to the entered length. So here, it sets the width of the carpet to 2 meters. When the checkbox is ticked, Audion will set the vertical dimension of the image to the entered length. Audion will always keep the aspect ratio when scaling assets. To finish creating the asset, you close the Asset Settings window and accept the confirmation. To edit the settings of an asset, replace the image with a different one, or delete the asset, Ctrl right-click on the asset. Again, you can double-check asset shortcuts at the bottom left corner of the window. You can also delete all assets with the Alt-Delete shortcut. Now, I will add an asset of a person. Of course, I want to place them on the floor. For this asset, the face camera option is enabled in its default settings. This option forces the asset to always be facing the camera. You will not see the effect while editing the asset. But when finished, it will look like this. This helps to avoid having the asset look like a cardboard cutout when viewed from the side. Additionally, the face camera setting keeps the asset upright even when repositioning, which is appropriate for assets of people or plants. There may be some situations where you would rather have the cardboard cutout effect than having the asset turned towards the camera. To do that, untick Face Camera. Then, you can freely adjust the orientation, and the asset will stay in that fixed orientation. If unticking Face Camera lays your asset on the floor, you can just raise it again with the elevation value. "3D assets are positioned and configured in the same way as it is done for 2D assets. However, since a 3D asset can be viewed from all angles, the face camera option is not needed. Therefore, the face camera option is not available for 3D assets. Next, let's assign an asset to a point source. By default, the 3D render will only show assets that are not assigned to any source or receiver. To show all sources and receivers, hit the J key once. If you keep pressing the J key, you will begin to scroll through the jobs in your job list, and the 3D render will display only the active sources for each job. You can see the currently active job in the 3D render by looking at the title bar. You can scroll backwards by pressing Shift-J. You can also go back to showing all sources and receivers, and no sources or receivers. You will also notice different camera positions and orientations. If the job does not have a single point response receiver defined, the camera will be placed at the center of the room. If the job does have a single point response receiver defined, the camera will be placed at that receiver point, and in either case, the camera's looking direction will be according to the receiver pointing towards source column in the job list. While sources and receivers are visible, you can assign an asset to a source or receiver by Ctrl-right-clicking on it. You can confirm that you have selected the source or receiver if it has turned magenta. The position and orientation of the asset will be linked to that of the source I selected, so the only way to move the asset or change its orientation would be to edit the source itself. To avoid accidentally moving the source, it is disabled by default. You can enable editing the position and orientation of the source with this checkbox. If you enable Face Camera, the asset will always face the camera, but this does not affect the orientation of the source. Receivers don't have a fixed orientation. Therefore, when editing the settings of an asset assigned to a receiver, there are no orientation settings. Assets can each have a set of default settings. For example, when we first added this asset, it already had a height of 1.9 meters and face camera enabled. These defaults can be changed or reapplied by clicking here. Now there are two windows. The top window contains the settings for the specific instance of the asset that you have placed in your model. The bottom window contains the default settings for that image. That is, these are the settings that will be loaded anytime you insert this image into any model. These settings are saved in a file with the INI extension in the folder containing the asset. The acoustical center is the point in the asset where the point source or receiver is supposed to be. For example, on the asset of a person assigned to a speech source, the acoustical center should be placed on the mouth. For this asset, it is represented by a height of 1.7 meters. So, Audient places the asset so that that point lines up with the position of the source. If you change any of the preset values, they will also be changed for the current instance of the asset. After changing any settings, you can reload the preset settings stored in the ini file by clicking Load Defaults. If you have changed any of the preset settings, and you want these to be the new preset settings for the asset, you click on Save Defaults. This overwrites the ini file. Finally, if you click on Reset Presets, this will reinitialize the preset values. However, the ini file is not overwritten until you manually click on Save Defaults. As previously mentioned, the first view of the 3D render does not show any sources or receivers. So, since this asset was assigned to a source, it will not show up in the first view of the 3D render. I will hit J to show sources and receivers. Now, the asset assigned to the source shows up rather than the original red sphere. You can also assign assets when creating a source or receiver in the source receiver list. You can select the subfolder here. And you can select an asset here. You will see a preview of the asset. If you use the up and down arrow keys while the file dropdown is active, you can preview the assets in succession. With this icon, you can set the height of the source or receiver so that the bottom of the asset is touching the floor. To import your own assets, simply copy them into Audient's Visual Assets folder, which is located in the main Audient folder. For 2D images, Audient supports the PNG and JPG formats. We mainly recommend PNG due to its ability to handle transparency. For 3D objects, Audient supports OBJ, 3ds, and STL files. Make sure to set appropriate defaults for your assets. Again, face camera should be disabled for floor or wall objects, such as carpets or wall art. And typically, it makes sense to have face camera enabled for people and plants. For a source, the acoustical center should be where the sound is emitted, such as a mouth or the acoustical center of a musical instrument. For a receiver, the acoustical center should be where the sound is perceived, such as the height of the ears or the tip of a microphone. With that, we conclude this tutorial, and we hope you have found it useful. Good luck!